Shad are running right now and everything is gorging on shad patterns. Creating something with flash, great movement, and noise is essential. The Clatter Shad was born out of a fly fisherman's overabundance of offset shank worm hooks, and also a need to create a shad pattern that makes noise during the shad run. This is how you tie it. This pattern is tied on an offset shank worm hook, something I have a ton of for some reason. This is a size 2 hook. It's a fairly large hook. So I always start with pinching the barb to make releases much easier. Before setting the hook in the vise, we need to add some beads to the hook shank. These are 5/32 nickel plated brass beads. This is going to give us the rattle that we desire, along with a little bit of flash on the belly of this fly. In addition, it's going to help that fly dip and sink and provide some erratic movement when it's stripped. One at a time, add these nickel beads onto the belly of the fly. Add a little extra push if you need to force them over the bottom bend of the hook. 3 beads or 4 beads worked fine. I wanted a pattern with a little bit more weight, so I added an additional bead. 3 beads works just as well. You can also consider adding a hot spot bead, some orange beads or red beads, if you have a different coloration that you want to throw out there. When we set the hook in the vise for the first time, I'm going to angle the hook so that the beads run downward towards the eye. This will allow me to tie on my bead stop hot spot on the back side of the hook shank. To do that, I'm going to use some fluorescent orange thread and a little bit of super glue. Get a base started right on the back side of the hook just before the bend, and make a few wraps to build up a small dam on the back side before adding a dab of super glue onto this hot spot and covering that super glue with a base of thread. This will ensure a nice little dam for these beads to run against. It won't break free from the hook, and it adds a nice little hot spot for fish to check out. And then we're going to reach for some Uni Thread, some red Uni Thread. The rest of this fly is going to be tied on the offset shank portion of this hook. Adjust your hook shank in the vise to ensure the offset portion of this hook shank is running horizontal, making it for an easier tie. Get a base of red Uni Thread started just behind the eye. And like all my streamer patterns, I'm adding some red for the gill flare, and saltwater angel hair is my go-to. Trim about a 2-inch piece of red saltwater angel hair from the pack, and we're going to tie it down on the offset portion of this hook shank. Fold any forward facing fibers rearward and capture them down as well. Once you get everything tied in, trim the saltwater angel hair just before the hook point on this offset shank hook. Next, I'm going to add pearl green angel hair. You can mix and match these colors. Peacock angel hair also works really well if you want a little bit of a darker profile on your flies. Just like the saltwater angel hair, we're going to pull a chunk from the hank and tie it in at its midpoint, and then fold all the forward facing material rearward and capture that down as well. This 8/0 thread doesn't build up much bulk, so it's nice to put a few more securing wraps and make a good base for the next material without having to worry about bulking up the front side of this fly. Next, we're going to tie in some white woolly bugger hackle feathers. I like my flies sparsely tied, so I'm only going to use 2 feathers, one on each side of the hook shank. If you need a more robust fly, add a few more feathers to each side. This pattern works very, very well in our clear waters of the Missouri River, sparsely tied with just 2 feathers. I'm going to start with a dab of super glue on the side of the hook, pull all the fuzzy fibers from the base of a bugger hackle to reveal the stem, and trim that stem to leave about an 1/8 inch of bare stem available to tie in on the hook. As you're getting more materials on this hook shank, you need to be very careful of the exposed hook point on these offset shank hooks. A lot of times stroking feathers rearward and messing with the pattern becomes instinctive for fly tiers. And speaking from experience, it's easy to pluck yourself on this hook when mindlessly fiddling with this fly. So just use caution when you tie in every single material, that hook point is ever present and ever exposed. Pinch that feather on the side of the hook and make a few capture wraps with your thread before straightening it out, making sure it looks good on the hook shank. And then add some securing wraps around the stem of that feather. Do the same to the other side of the hook. I'm going to add a soft hackle style collar to this fly, and I like to vary the color just a little bit. You can make it anything you want, but I'm using a badger saddle hackle just to add a little bit of variation, a little bit of dark contrast to the front side of this shad pattern. Preen all the individual fibers of the saddle hackle rearward and trim the tip to create a nice triangle tie-in point. Capture this triangle on the back side of this offset shank just in front of the other materials and begin wrapping this hackle like you would a soft hackle feather. Just preening the fibers rearward with every single wrap, and keep that collar material in the same place as you make consecutive wraps. Once you make this collar as robust as you want it, capture those materials down with your thread and secure them in place with a few wraps over the top and a few wraps in front, and then trim your excess stem material from that hackle feather. After you capture that hackle collar, you can go ahead and add a whip finish or some half hitches and then trim your thread. I've caught a lot of fish on this pattern without eyes, but I definitely prefer it with eyes on the front side. So I'm going to add some adhesive back molded eyes. Start with a dab of super glue and add an adhesive backed eye to each side of the hook shank. Just make sure that they are placed on even with each other on either side of the hook, and allow them to set a little bit in that super glue prior to adding some epoxy. Finally, to finish the head of the fly, I'm going to put epoxy on the top and on the bottom of this pattern and use a bodkin to mold this thick epoxy around the entire head of this fly. I like to get it around the eyes and on the top and on the bottom and try and make sure that everything is connected before hitting it with the light. This can take a little bit of time, be patient with it. Add a little bit more epoxy if you need to spread it out some more. If you give it time, it evens itself out pretty well. It might not look good in the beginning, but just keep working with it, let it settle, and it'll look great. Hit it with the light, and then I always like to add one thin layer of some bone dry epoxy as well, just to take away any stickiness from that head and add a little bit more shine. That bone dry really does do the trick for that. Once you hit it with the light again, that's your finished clatter shad. The first time I used this pattern, I was amazed at how aggressive the fish were chasing it. This pattern was created for bass, but it'll catch anything else that chases shad, catfish, walleyes, northern, and it should be a great pattern for trout fishing as well. It's been a great pattern for me, and I hope it helps you out on your home waters. These are all the materials you'll need to tie the clatter shad. Head down to your local fly shop and ask for larva lace by name. If they don't have the larva lace materials you need, you can tell them to go to hagensfish.com and get them ordered, or they can call Lorie at the shop and get the best high quality synthetic fly tying materials on the market right now at the best prices. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up and comment below to help other people find it. We'd really appreciate that. And also subscribe for monthly fly tying tutorials from Larva Lace and Hagens. Thanks for being a part of the Larva Lace community. Here's the tight lines and well-tied flies.